Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're located today. Welcome to today's Scrum Pulse. I'm Lindsay Velasina here with Scrum.org. I'll be moderating the session today. And today we have a super exciting presentation here with PST Yuval Yeret. And we're going to be talking about fixing OKRs through EBM and outcomes. So welcome everybody and welcome Yuval.
Thank you, Lindsay. Good to
All
be here
right.
again.
Yeah, absolutely. So next slide, please. Okay. So your microphones are muted. However, we do encourage you to ask questions. So please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical issues or just comments, anything like that, please utilize the chat. All right. So next slide. Okay, so very quickly about Scrum.org, in case you aren't familiar, we are the home of Scrum. Our mission is to help people and teams solve complex problems. And we were founded by Ken Schwaber in 2009. He is our founder and also the co-creator of Scrum. And we want you to, we encourage lots of ongoing learning as well as we offer our professional Scrum training and certification. There are a lot of free ways to learn on our website, which you found this today. So this is one of them through our webinar program. And I hope that today's session plays an important part in your learning journey. So with that, I would like to pass it over to you, Val, to introduce himself and kick us off.
Thank you, Lindsay. Let me play with how the presentation works. Awesome. So great to be here. This session actually relates to the broader mission of Scrum.org that Lindsay talked about. It's not just about Scrum. It's about helping people and teams solve complex problems. And that's also what I'm doing, what I've been doing in recent years. I've been helping business, product, and technology leaders create organizations that thrive as they scale through nuanced strategic product and agility interventions using the ideas of Scrum, outcome orientation, evidence-based at multiple layers of the organization. But with the specialization, somehow I evolved in that direction, in evolving to scalable, leaner product ways of working on the foundations of previous investments, whether that's an agile implementation or in the conversation we're talking about today, OKRs. Those previous investments often result in what we call theater or factories, and that's going to be part of the conversation today. As Lindsay mentioned, I'm a professional Scrum trainer, but I also have the unique integration of Scrum and SAFe, being a SAFe fellow in SPCT, and also integrating the sense and respond learning materials from Jeff Gothelf and Joshua Seiden. So before we dive too deep into the conversation, Lindsay has a poll for us that asks you, where are you on your OKR journey? It will be good to know, who do we have here today? Where are you on the journey? And if you can also add some additional context in the chat, that would be great. Where are you coming from? Which organization it is? What are you doing with OKRs? But for starters, please answer the poll that Lindsay just launched in front of us. And while people are answering this, the answers might sound weird to you. So let me walk a bit through what they mean. So when we say, those different choices, we're talking about the stages of the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect talks about the stages of adopting and becoming more competent in anything, be it Agile, Scrum, OKRs. And it tracks an interesting movement between the level of confidence that you have and the actual level of competence. So initially, when you start something, you think you know everything. That's typically when you're just starting something. That's why we call it the peak of Mount Stupid. Not because people are stupid, but because there's a high level of confidence that's misplaced. We actually don't know that much. But then we recognize it. We start to realize we don't know as much as we thought. Our confidence drops dramatically, and we're stuck in the valley of despair. And then over time, if we stick to it and still believe in the hope, in the promise of what we're talking about, we get to the slope of enlightenment and eventually to the plateau of sustainability. So that's the generic Dunning-Kruger effect. And we can ask that question about where are you with Scrum or with OKRs. Specifically, I'm interested in where are you with OKRs today, because one of the things that we're seeing in the market is OKRs are very successful. OKRs have been successful as the technique that has become, the flywheel for strategic execution. It's become the way to overcome silos, politics, turf wars, complexity and uncertainty through alignment to a small focused set of strategic outcomes and measuring only what matters. The intent is to create a flywheel. Why do we say flywheel? Or you can think about it like the merry-go-round when you go to the playground with your kids. It's relatively hard to push it at the beginning, but if you keep turning it and spinning it over time, it builds its own momentum and it becomes easier and easier to turn over time. That's the intent of OKRs. And
Before we
not just
go any further, Yuval, do you want to share the
Yes, at this
okay.
point, let's share the results once
Okay.
I explain, and let's see where people are.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
All right.
So let's see. So we have quite a good mix of people throughout their OKR journey, it seems. Good. That's good to know.
Okay.
And again, if you want to share more in the chat and already start to, um, ask your questions in the Q&A section, that would be great. We'll pause to look at questions along the way. But just to recap, OKRs hold a great promise of being that flywheel that as you start to install them and use them, you improve the effectiveness of your organizational operating system, you execute better, and that better execution and traction builds confidence in the organization that we can, deliver value, that we can get traction on our strategic initiatives, and it goes beyond product development. OKRs are for managing initiatives across the organization, the most important things across the organizations. And if something works, leaders and people become stronger and stronger advocates for it. So we become better at it. We transition, we climb the slope of enlightenment towards the plateau of sustainability when that is the case. So initially, OKRs in the market were a flywheel for several organizations. They were a flywheel for Google as it grew. And that's documented in Measure What Matters. Other companies used it more and more. But what started to happen is OKRs became very successful, almost too successful. And more people started to use it. And we got to a situation which happens often with things where there was little competence or too little competence around OKRs in the market. Jerry Weinberg talked about the law of the raspberry jam, that competence was spread over too many organizations, and organizations got stuck on the peak of Mount Stupid and then sunk straight into the valley of despair. And instead of being a flywheel, OKRs became a downward spiral. We started to see more and more anti-patterns as a result of misapplication of OKRs that led to the organization is struggling to actually execute. See, this is spinning the other direction. And unlike the merry-go-round, when you spin, the organizational flywheel in the other direction, the organization gets stuck. The focus becomes focused on the mechanics, not really on the intent. It becomes a shadow of itself, which we'll talk about today. And then the results, the execution, the traction, strategic outcomes over time get slower and slower, and it seems like the organization is getting stuck. It's getting stalled. The more this is happening, there's even less trust in both the operating system and in the people in the organization. And the more we reinforce legacy, centralized control mindset. This is a common pattern that we're seeing. You could replace OKRs with Agile. You could replace it with SAFe. You could replace it with product operating model. But today we're going to talk about the anti-patterns, specifically in the world of OKRs and what we might do about them. But as you're going through this, you can leverage what you know from what makes agility work, what makes evidence-based management work. Because a lot of these OKR anti-patterns are actually addressed by what we've learned works in the Agile space. So let's start here. The first thing we see in organizations that use OKRs is that everybody gets an OKR. There's an OKR for everything. OKR for people, OKR for all of our projects, all of our work. Everything gets an OKR. And when everything gets an OKR, nothing is really important. One of my favorite books on OKRs is Radical Focus. Focus is key to OKRs. When everything is an OKR and we do all of our OKRs, it's like Lucy in the Chocolate Factory. We can't keep up the pace. It's unsustainable. So you won't be surprised when we start talking about the fact that OKRs should be limited, should be your big rocks. If we're talking about evidence-based management, we're talking about having a small, very small set of strategic goals. Maybe it's just one strategic goal. If it's a team, even if it's a company, it should be ideally one strategic goal and intermediate goals that paint the path towards it, what we'll measure and focus on along the way. But it's not everything. And we don't treat everything in our work as goals. One of my other favorite books in this space is The 4 Disciplines of Execution. That comes from, the world of Covey, of Stephen Covey. One of his sons, I believe, wrote or co-wrote Disciplines of Execution that talks about rocks or the wildly important goals that are those rocks in the jar, that you start with the big rocks first. And only then do you add the other things. But the pebbles, the sand, all of the whirlwind of the current work, that doesn't need to be OKRs. So one of the exercises that you might want to try with your work is look at everything that you're currently using as OKRs if you're already trying, or if you're currently managing work before you're implementing OKRs, maybe you can anticipate this. And sort all of this work into a couple of different categories. Business as usual work that you need to do. It's important to do it, but it doesn't need to rise to the level of OKRs. KPIs, things that are important to measure, but they're pretty healthy right now, and there's no proactive focus that you want to dedicate to them. And then the real OKRs, the big rocks that you want to focus on, the things you are working to really change in your business, in your product, in your organization. OKRs are about developing your organization, changing its state. In the world of EBM, we talked about current value, keeping things working well, versus unrealized value, dissatisfaction gaps. OKRs, objectives and key results, these sort of strategic goals, they talk typically about the unrealized value, big gaps that we want to tackle. They could also be about we have big gaps in our current value, our customers are unhappy, they're leaking. That could be something that we focus on, or it could be tapping into a new market, but it shouldn't be all of the work. And it shouldn't be we maintain high quality if quality is still high. It could be we fix this resiliency issue, our products are starting to stutter in the market, the amount of trading volatility that we're seeing in the market, there's way too much action and our products are not at the scale that they need to be. That could become an OKR. And you might have a lot of ideas of what should be your big rocks, legitimate big rocks. Let's say in this exercise, you actually see a lot of options for what should be, here in this area. Real OKRs that, you want to focus on. Can you really focus on them? If we go back to Lucy in the chocolate factory, we kind of know that we have a limited capacity. So one of the other things I like to do is to bring focus and flow to OKRs. Create a Kanban board for your OKRs to visualize how many of them are we considering, to help you manage this process of considering the funnel of potential goals, review, analyze, decide which of them do we really want to focus on, drive the conversation with the people that would need to be involved in actually achieving this goal. Can we actually do this? How many of them can we do in parallel? What would it take? Are all of the people that are involved in this, able to do this? And only then committing to an OKR and making it part of your cadence. This isn't anything new. The planning game, that we use in sprint planning with our backlog tells us a lot of what we should be doing when it comes to our goals. Goals as well are a process where there should be a difference between who owns the value and prioritizes the ideas in the backlog and the team that is focused on how much can we actually do, what is a realistic commitment. We're not managing sprints in OKRs, but a lot of the concepts still apply. So bottom line, stop starting, start finishing. Think about using an OKR to manage or think about using a Kanban to manage your OKR flow. Let's pause here for a second, see if there's anything in the questions that we need to tackle. No.
There aren't, but there are a few comments in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Just from earlier. Someone had commented, OKRs managing contract performance on behalf of clients earlier when you were doing the poll. Somebody commented, I'm not sure which one they were referring to, but they said that is one OKR I really don't like in our OKRs, kept quality index above X. If we are already in a good place, it's not something where we need to focus change, just have a KPI and follow along.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Ian, good. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
So there's one about organization is try to implement, but more output focused. Yes. So that's exactly what we're talking about here. The typical way organizations implement OKRs is they just take the current way they describe work, which is typically in activities or outputs, A product organization typically talks in outputs. Sometimes, if it's a great product organization, it talks in outcomes, the desirable things that we want the customer to experience. But when you go and implement OKRs broadly in the organization and you bring it to HR, sales, customer service, professional services, a lot of the time, the work there is described in activities. Why is that an issue? There are a couple of issues with using these sort of OKRs. The main reason is that if you think about what we're using OKRs for, we're using OKRs to manage the strategic work for the organization. Working on the organization, not in the organization. We're not using OKRs to manage a specific sales activity or hire a person. We're using OKRs to develop future capabilities, whether it's developing our future products or product capabilities or developing new ways to hire, how to leverage AI in the organization. These activities are typically complex work. It's work or outcomes that live in the complex domain. There's uncertainty around how would we achieve this outcome. There's even uncertainty around what would need to be true to achieve this outcome, or even whether this outcome makes sense. What we've learned in the Scrum.org world, and we talk about in evidence-based management and in Scrum, to be honest, is that complex work is best managed through empiricism and decentralized control. So going back to the type of OKRs that we see, managing activities and outputs doesn't deal that well with uncertainty. It's fixed. It's like the project plans that we, follow instead of enabling us to respond to change. Focusing on outcomes for our customers enables us to have the space to figure out what do we really need to do. Learning, sensing, responding through evidence. What do we really need to do to achieve this goal, to achieve this outcome? Output and activity-focused tasks can be high in alignment. They can even be too high. They're micromanaging a lot of the time. I'm working with a client where we have this issue where leadership is talking in way too detailed levels about what they need. They provide a book of work. The autonomy level is low, so people feel like pawns and not players. They cannot really make decisions. And when there's an opportunity to do something better, they cannot really take advantage because they feel like they're, in a tunnel. So we want to shift to higher autonomy that gives us more flexibility to better deal with this reality. One other model that I really like in this space is a model that comes all the way from the Prussian army in the 18th century, which is what Stephen Bungay talks about in the book, The Art of Action. And he talks about a couple of different gaps that make it very hard to succeed in the face of uncertainty, whether that uncertainty is the fog of war or solving other complex problems in our organization. One is the knowledge gap, the difference between what we would like to know and what we actually know. The next is the alignment gap, the difference between what we want people to do and what they actually go and do. There could be plans, but the actions could vary from those plans. People are all people. And even if we execute perfectly on plans with full knowledge, there could be an effects gap. The difference between what we expect our actions to achieve and what they actually achieve. So the answer that Bungay suggests is focusing on outcomes. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. Talk about the why and the what, not the how. And that's exactly what we focus on in evidence-based management as well. Describing the goals in terms of outcomes which enables us to run an experimentation loop using small steps towards immediate tactical goals and then intermediate goals to both get traction, measure that traction using leading indicators, and adjust both, the direction that we're taking towards achieving the goal, and maybe even the goal itself, which is indicated, by the fact that the strategic goal could even shift a bit based on what we learn along the way. So one exercise you might want to try is to look at all of your goals right now and map them to this taxonomy. Map the goals to, are they allocating, is the goal described in will allocate a certain budget, a certain number of people to a certain area? I am seeing these sort of goals in organizations I work with. Are they describing activities or outputs like features we will create, processes that we will come up with? Those are better than activities, but they are still not outcomes. Outcomes are described in what a customer, could be an internal customer, will be able to do once we achieve this goal. And what that customer will be able to do is in service of the business impact. It's also problematic to talk about impact because that's too high level. That doesn't give us direction on how do we plan to win this? How do we plan to move the needle? It's a bit too far. So see how your OKRs land on this taxonomy. Maybe it's spread all over. Maybe it's, centered, weighted towards impact or activities or outputs, and think about how could we map it more towards outcomes, which is where, the next step comes in, which is use whatever mapping, technique works for you to shift from activities and outputs or impacts in the other direction towards outcomes. You can ask, why do we believe this would help? Or what are our thoughts on how we will move the needle here? What's the intent here? What would be leading indicators? There's, a whole exercise of how do we do this in the EBM workshops, and you can also look at the technique on the right called outcome mapping. So there are multiple techniques for doing this, but this is crucial. And it's especially hard for people that aren't in the product organization, that are not used to doing these things, that are not used to mapping and thinking about outcomes. This is the future of the product ownership skills, and slicing and impact mapping that we've honed when working on products. All right, so let's talk a bit about scaling. Why would we need to scale OKRs? If we have a large organization, achieving a goal might require work from dozens or hundreds of people. Multiple teams might be involved in achieving our goals. So there might be a somewhat complex network of things that would need to take place to achieve this goal. Even when there's a mission in an organization, there's a set of submissions that need to be achieved or completed in order to achieve a bigger goal. The common pattern that people use for this is cascading. But cascading is a slippery slope. What do we mean by cascading? Strict cascading means that we give the different layers in the organization their goals. We define our goals, let's say at the company level, one big goal. And as part of defining that goal, we define what the different functions or business units or departments or areas of the organization or different teams would need to do for this goal. The problem with that is the moment you do that, this sort of breakdown immediately leads to task and output orientation, the lower you go in the cascade. And if the other thing that happens is organizations that are used to managing things Once you start to build a cascade, they start to expect that everything will be connected. They start to ask questions like, this OKR, where does it map in the cascade, in our OKR hierarchy? And when everything needs to be connected, it will either create an OKR explosion, where back to Oprah with everything is an OKR, or people will, will rationalize connections that aren't even there. So a lot of the time, organizations run a relatively healthy OKR implementation, but the moment they start to scale it, deploy it throughout the organization, it starts the doom loop, the downward spiral, at least based on what I've seen.
Can I interject just with a quick question?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. So Layla here asked for a concrete example of what OKR scaling looks like.
Yeah, so this is an example, right? We might have a goal of, let's talk about AI transformation, because can you get through a day without talking about it? So the CEO of, let's say, a scale-up company with hundreds of people decides that we really need to use AI to transform how we run the business. Okay? Company level goal. But that's too high to energize, to mobilize the entire organization. And maybe not everybody in the organization needs to be involved in that, but there will still be dozens of people that would be involved in it. So maybe they decide to break it down into, okay, we'll use OKRs to improve how we find and onboard talent. That's one OKR. There could be another OKR for we use AI to scale up our customer service and customer experience, while not scaling, with the current amount of people that we have in the organization. So those could be two sub OKRs. Now, each one of those OKRs might then map to, OKRs for improving talent acquisition and onboarding. This could be broken down into AI for talent acquisition and AI for onboarding. But then it starts to be a slippery slope, because we're starting to tell talent acquisition what they need to be doing. And we might be giving them too many details and discussing activities and telling them, this is what you need to be doing. While instead, and maybe what happens at this point is for, improving, let's talk about the customer, the onboarding, a real world example from a client. Improving the onboarding might involve people from different organizations. It might involve work in IT, in HR, throughout the organization. The hiring managers throughout the organization need to be involved in this. So what do? So we create sub OKRs for each one of these groups, because we need OKRs for everything, and we need OKRs that people can own. And what happens is that the OKR for IT now becomes an activity or an output. They don't own the outcome of better onboarding. They own their piece of it. So we get an explosion of OKRs, and we get people that are, again, pawns and not players. So one of the alternatives, and this is a real world example to scaling OKRs, is to actually descale and say, okay, if we really want to transform, and this OKR wasn't transformed with AI because it was a couple of years ago, but it's close enough. If onboarding is one of our company level goals, because we're in a phase of growth, we're scaling up, and we've seen that, onboarding is taking too much time until people are effective, and it takes too much time of the people currently in the organization, so it slows us down. An alternative to scaling and creating a cascade is to actually organize our own OKRs. Maybe what we can do is think about OKRs and ask ourselves, what are the OKRs where it would make sense to build a virtual team around them? And once you build a team around this, you can have fewer OKRs because the OKRs are staying at the level of the outcomes that cut across the functions. You don't need to do this for everything. For example, in this example, if there's an OKR that just maps to one team in the organization, fine. But if there's an OKR that tracks to 3 or 4 different areas of the organization, and it's an OKR that has especially high complexity, it might make sense to create this sort of virtual team. There will never be a perfect way to organize that eliminates all dependencies and all collaborations. You will still need some aspects of scaling if you're, a large organization, but using virtual OKR teams or virtual outcome-oriented teams can help you minimize this challenge. And when it comes to what do you do with the OKRs that still span multiple teams, the alternative to cascading is to inform rather than prescribe, to share company level OKRs, to share why are we focusing on this now. Share that with teams, departments, business units, and they come up with their own OKRs bottom up and sideways, meaning based on their context, based on what they understand from the needs of the company and the needs of their peer groups, right? So people still have dependencies on other groups. Even if you're trying to organize around value, it will never be perfect. And each one of these OKRs, you connect it via the why now. You talk about we're gonna introduce a new HR management system or a new productivity suite because or a new LMS, a new learning management system in the organization, because it's crucial for the new onboarding. We identified that the new onboarding needs a new LMS. It doesn't make sense for that to live inside that virtual team focused on onboarding. So we're setting it as a goal for us in IT. But the reason it's a goal now is because onboarding is happening. This process at scale might look something like this. I'm not going to go into the details, but you can look at it in the recording and the slides that we'll share. But there, and I also have an article about this, but very high level, this might look familiar to people that are practicing certain scaled agile approaches. Essentially, high level, we're providing context, intent. What is the company or the organizational unit that we're talking about trying to achieve? What are our goals? Then we're breaking out, and the different teams, functions talk about, okay, what does this mean for us? What do we need from each other? They create some sort of draft OKRs, they socialize them, they get back together, they review things, give feedback to each other, go through another round, and then they come up with a set of OKRs that connects to the needs of the company, but is also realistic and based on the knowledge in the trenches. To sum up what we've seen here, we talked about a couple of different anti-patterns that make OKRs more of a downward spiral rather than the flywheel that they should be. And we talked about some suggestions based on the world of evidence-based management, based on flow, based on Scrum, based on a lot of things that we know how to do already. We just need to apply them based on the underlying understanding that OKRs are really about the complex work for developing our organization. And when we're talking about developing our organization, a lot of what we know from developing products applies. And if we start to apply this, we will really see improvements in the organizational operating system. We will see more outcome orientation and evidence-based tracking of real leading indicators that will unlock execution. It might take time. It might be slow in the beginning, like a flywheel. But we will start to see traction towards strategic outcomes, ability to execute on major projects rather than a feeling that anything complex in this organization gets stuck. And people that want to go back to the startup days. And the feeling that we really need to add more and more layers of PMOs and management and more techniques, but it's not really solving it. Instead of that, we will start to see execution. We will start to see improvements in the strategic traction, which will build confidence in our operating system. This would lead to leaders and practitioners becoming advocates rather than skeptics for outcome-focused, evidence-based leadership, which would lead to more and more investments in making OKRs really work, improving the flow of OKRs, the outcome orientation of OKRs. This is what I see in organizations that are successfully spinning their flywheel. We're starting to see leaders that are asking each other questions around, is this outcome oriented? How can we make this outcome oriented? What is this a leading indicator or a lagging indicator? What could be a leading indicator for this? What could we do instead of this? Which of these are the most complex things that we might want to consider organizing a virtual team around? All of these are things that you see in an organization that is spinning the flywheel, which creates more and more execution traction and outcomes over time. This is what we're aiming to do. And finally, the question or one last thing that you could find useful beyond this taxonomy of anti-patterns and possible things to try is looking at your own OKR flywheel. Or a better question is your OKR a flywheel or a downward spiral or doom loop for your organization? Are you at the point where OKR are theater, a factory of things, or something that really contributes to achieving strategic outcomes? I created this this assessment that I will take a minute to actually drop the link for in the chat if anybody wants to try it. Essentially, what this will take you through is some questions related to the conversation here. And when you do this, after you answer these 10 questions, and it will take you a bit longer if you really think about the questions, but not much longer, it will show you where do you stand, what are the strong elements, and give you some suggestions for next steps. And a special offer for people in this webinar is, if you'd like, I'm happy to take a look at your OKR flywheel and give you some personalized analysis of what would I do if I saw that, based on my experience working with organizations that often need help changing their OKR from a downward spiral to a flywheel. So with that in mind, if you're interested, there's still a QR code for that on this page, as well as some more information, some more articles about OKRs that I've been writing for a while, as well as some other things. Let's turn to questions.
Okay.
I see that
So
Sonia has issues with with the link. Would be interesting to see if others are able to manage it. If not, I'll take a look in a bit.
Let me
But
test
let's
it
tackle
really
questions
quick.
first.
Okay, I do not have an issue with that link.
Okay.
So it's possible it's on your side, Sonia. We can reach out to you after this and help you with that. So, okay, this first question. So the suggestion here is to apply safe logic of big room planning to OKR planning and workshops? Question mark. What would this look like if there were 4 to 5 flight levels inside an entire company of, say, 1,000 people?
Yeah. So high level, that's one thing that I've tried and works really nicely. It works nicely at the level of Dunbar's number, right? If you do it at the level of 100, 200 people at a in the room, it works, not just because of the room size, but because of the amount of interactions that you need to manage. If you have a group of, let's say, 1,000 people with more flight levels, you probably need to do multiple levels of this. You might need to do, if we go back to that example, you might need to say, okay, initially what we're going to do is we're going to do this with the level of the leadership and 1 or 2 levels, the leaders of the different groups or the different PUs, because we're not going to be able to bring everybody. The challenge with that would be that it's not going to be everybody in the room. So it's not really getting the granularity and color on the OKRs of the people that will actually implement them. So there would need to be some optionality. There would need to be, as the result of this, some understanding that this is still, directional, and we might inform and go back to, we will take the output from this high level conversation, first 2 or 3 levels of OKRs, to the rest of the organization, do big room planning, now within different areas, and both create OKRs for these areas, but also bring that back to the big to the strategic level, to the company level, with any impacts, with any gaps, which is similar to how you do this process for managing work and planning at a group of 1,000 product people in a product organization. So a lot of inspiration that you can leverage if you're already using something like SAFe, or even if not. Hopefully that helps. Let me know if you have follow-up questions.
Okay.
Where should we go next?
So this next one, how would you go about highlighting the importance of EBM and professional agile leadership to build a successful foundation for OKRs to executives that are not familiar with or skeptical toward agile?
Yeah, it's not about agile. Nothing here is about agile, and I would not use the term agile, to be honest. There's a question around, should we use the term agility? In some organizations, it's better. In some organizations, I wouldn't even use that. What I do, and there are different ideas in the deck of metaphors that you can use, whether it's intent-based leadership, turn the ship around, or use this example of alignment and autonomy that's needed when you're working on complex work, or use Boom Guy's metaphors for things that the army learned about using this. I would try to learn, where is the leadership of this organization coming from. So a current client, for example, the leaders are coming from the police force and the fire department. Interestingly enough, it's a financial tech company, but the leaders are coming from that space. So the models that we used when we talk about OKRs and try to convince them of moving towards outcome orientation, evidence-based management. We don't use evidence-based management necessarily explicitly, but we talk about what are we trying to do there and why. We talk about the fact that there's this gap. There's this gap of uncertainty when we're tackling, sorry, I was navigating in the wrong direction. There's this gap that when we're tackling complex work and there are surprises, we need to do something better to manage them. Empiricism makes sense. If it's a financial organization, they understand risk. They understand hedging for risk. So let's use the language that makes sense, would be my answer.
Okay.
Think about it rather than throw frameworks at them.
That makes sense. All right. So this person, so sometimes company defines OKRs and asks them to be a secret of other staff. Is that the best scenario, and how do we manage that?
I mean, it's not necessarily the best scenario, but sometimes it is the reality that there are some strategic initiatives that we cannot share with everybody. There's an interesting, it's a matter of culture in the organization. One, I don't have a great answer, but one thing that comes to mind is at HubSpot, Dharmesh Shah talks about the fact that they challenged this notion that when you're a traded company, there's a very small set of people that, you know, are that you can share this sensitive information with. And they said, at least for a while, way into their scale-up journey, that in their case, everybody is somebody that's on that list. So I guess the question is, what is the reason? Is the organization willing to change its approach to secrecy in order to create empowerment? That's one direction. If it's not, then you need to think about what's the maximum that we can share about why we're doing something within our constraints. And maybe that's a situation where what makes sense is to really create a separate organization, a virtual or even physical organization, where the people do know about what we're trying to achieve here and where we can work somewhat differently. This is where the skunk works approach that, you know, you can create a Chinese wall between areas of the organization can be helpful.
So next question, can OKRs be applied at the team level or in the organization? It has to be on the organization level, like changing the whole flow and adding a new flow?
It doesn't have to be at the organizational level, but you will get farther if the organizational ecosystem is supporting alignment, empowerment, outcome orientation, and evidence-based management. If you're just doing this inside a group and that group has a lot of connections and a lot of governance from, let's call it, legacy management systems, your mileage may vary and it won't be that effective. And it depends on where you're coming from, but an alternative to start from without going through the entire organization, it might be better to actually start from the top and start to change the upstream, what I call the upstream, where the problems, the micromanagement, the focusing on the activities are actually coming from. But you can't always go and do that. So it really depends on what is the context that you have, what sort of championship do you have for this? What is the problem that you're trying to solve with this?
Okay.
I see the next one is a bit related. Is it good if OKRs are mostly sales and revenue focused? You know, it's not that related, but it's a good question. It's something that happens often. Sales and revenue focus are typically what we call impact. And I'm working right now with an organization that has that challenge, where the problem with this is it's too far for the people that are actually working towards these outcomes. If it's the sales organization that has, you know, these goals, maybe it makes sense. but if it's an organization that is going to create some customer outcomes in service of these revenue goals or margin goals, then it's a bit too far because they can't really achieve those goals. They do something that will enable those goals. And that's one problem. The other problem is we're not giving enough guidance. We're not providing this team with the strategy for, okay, nice goals. It's like the underpants gnomes. Step 3, profit, world domination. But what do we really want to? What's step 2? What is our bet on what do we need to achieve to move the needle on these outcomes? Typically, what happens when we do that is we say something like collect all the underpants, step 1 in the underpants gnomes. We jump from the revenue goals to the direct things that the business needs us to do. And that's a major anti-pattern that we're seeing. So move from both of these directions back to outcomes.
Okay, thank you. This next one, would you recommend using AI for OKRs? We are considering creating an automation for AI to be an advisor on key OKRs. Of course, executives would still review them, but we want the AI to be the first one to spot issues in OKR drafting.
Yeah, I'm playing with this. I created an OKR coach that I'm toying with. I'm using it before I give feedback on OKRs. It's non-trivial to create something that I trust, the output from, but it's an interesting exercise to develop, the AI coaching prompt. I look at it as, as a development challenge itself. I think it makes sense to look at it. I think it makes sense to try. If you're getting to a point where the outcome is that it's giving good feedback, that, it looks 85% like a good OKR coach would have given you that feedback, why not use it for this purpose, for providing feedback on OKRs, for helping people as a co-pilot for OKRs, not to come up with the OKRs for the organization.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so we have like 2 minutes left. We could maybe ask one more question. So this
I'll
one,
answer the 2 of them because I
okay.
like them. Let me try to.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So why do many organizations focus more on measuring outputs than outcomes? Because it's where they're coming from. It's what they're used to. It's like, why are all of our stories technical stories rather than really outcome focused stories? It's the steady state. But another reason is the way they're structured. If the organization is structured functionally, most organizations are, it's not stream-aligned teams for sure outside the product organization. Once you start to cascade OKRs, you get to the point that it's output-oriented OKRs. So a mix of these things. Is there any specific size of company that you recommend to start using OKRs? I use OKRs for myself, to be honest. Is it this sort of heavy process? Of course not. Typically, the organizations that start to look at OKRs are organizations that scale beyond the ability of, the founder, the leader of an organizational unit to manage everything. It typically is when they reach the point of scale up. Multiple things start happening. Traction starts to become slower and slower. It feels like the organization is slowing down, the point at which an organization is feeling like maybe we need to hire a PMO. That's typically the signal that it might make sense to go to OKRs instead as a framework.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Yuval. And I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Thank you to our audience for the great questions here. What is the best way for folks to get in touch with you, Yuval, if they have follow-up questions or anything like that?
Now let me slide quickly into here. So the best way would probably be to just take the OKR flywheel, see what it says for you, and you'll get an email for me afterwards. Feel free to reply and reach out. If you need help with OKRs, there's a link here, and it will be in the slides and follow-up emails that we share. I'm on LinkedIn, trying to post frequently, and you can also subscribe to insights that I share pretty frequently on my newsletter. And it's sent from my personal email, and I monitor all of the replies, so it's a great way to interact with me.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Yuval, for your time, and thank you, audience. And we hope to see you again soon.